Ladies and gentlemen, this is DVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. Now, in this episode, we dive into the world of prisoner swaps between geopolitical adversaries. We're talking about a series of high-stakes trade dealing with spies, journalists, and former Marines. This week, history was made with the largest prisoner exchange between Russia and the West since the Cold War. Not since the day of hair metal have we seen such a significant swap. So why did it happen, and what is the history of these exchanges? Take a look at our latest report to find out more.
The largest prisoner exchange between Russia and the West since the Cold War was completed last week, resulting in the release of 24 individuals. The complex operation between Washington and Moscow allowed for the release of 16 prisoners who were returned to Europe and the US. In exchange, 8 Russian prisoners incarcerated in the US, Norway, Germany, Poland and Slovenia were set free. The swap was held on the runway of an Ankara airport and supervised by Turkish intelligence services. US President Joe Biden confirmed that Wall Street Journal correspondent Evan Gershkovich, US Marine veteran Paul Whelan, Russian-American journalist Alsu Kurmasheva and Russian-British activist Vladimir Kara-Murza were among those released.
It didn't feel real until we were flying over England. I'm a British citizen, Irish citizen, Canadian and American. So as we came over England and I looked down, that's when it became real. We flew over Ireland, then Canada and into America. And then I knew I was home. So getting off the plane, seeing the president, the vice president, that was nice. It was a good homecoming. So looking forward to seeing my family down here and just recuperating from 5 years, 7 months, and 5 days of just absolute nonsense by the Russian government.
Earlier discussions had included jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, but the offer fell through after his death in February. The deal, which took over 18 months to finalize, hinged on Moscow's demand for Vadim Krasikov, who was serving a life sentence in Germany for a political execution.
That was a very, very difficult decision. It's a weighing up of various interests. From our point of view, the good of freedom and the lives of the prisoners in Russia and Belarus were more important than these 15 people should have a free life, a good prospect for their future. Weighing up the fact that you release someone who has been sentenced to murder.
Russian President Vladimir Putin greeted the returning Russians at Moscow's Vnukovo airport. Among them were 2 children of a Russian couple convicted of spying in Slovenia, who until last week were unaware of their true nationality. The last notable prisoner swap occurred in December 2022 and involved US basketball star Brittney Griner and Russian arms dealer Viktor But.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Now, the deal brokered in Ankara saw 24 prisoners changing hands amidst a backdrop of tense negotiations, tricky concessions, and ever-looming shadow of the war in Ukraine. President Biden hailed the swap as a feat of diplomacy, which is another way of saying this was harder than finding a needle in a haystack while blindfolded and wearing mittens. The U.S. managed to secure the release of 16 individuals, including Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and former Marine Paul Whelan. Now, in exchange, the West sent 8 prisoners back to Russia. Among them, Vadim Krasnikov, a man convicted of carrying out a hit on a Chechen rebel in Berlin. Now, you might be wondering, does this mean a thawing of relations between Russia and the West? Is this the dawn of a new era of peace and cooperation? According to U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, not quite. But to understand the significance of the swap, let's take a stroll down memory lane and revisit some of the most famous prisoner exchanges in history. Our first stop is February 1962 at the Bridge of Spies. Now, this Cold War hotspot saw the first major swap between the Soviet Union and the United States, which involved American pilot Francis Gary Powers and Soviet spy Rudolf Abel. Let's also not forget about the 1986 exchange, where Soviet dissident Anatoly Sharansky was traded for a group of Soviet spies, marking a significant moment in the human rights movement. Fast forward to more recent times, and we have the 2010 exchange, where 10 Russian spies, including the infamous Anna Chapman, were traded for 4 men accused of spying for the West. Now, these swaps are often labeled as hostage diplomacy, While these exchanges can sometimes pave the way for future releases, their impact on broader geopolitical relation is usually limited. So why do countries engage in these swaps? Well, it's partly about humanitarian concerns, partly about political leverage, and let's face it, partly about saving face on a global stage. For leaders, securing the release of their citizen is a PR win, a way to show strength and resolve. For the prisoners, it's a lifeline, a return to freedom after what is often years of uncertainty and hardship. Behind each exchange are stories of families torn apart, years lost behind bars, and the harsh reality of international politics. It's a reminder that in a world of espionage and diplomacy, human lives are often the pawns in the much larger game. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Bartłomiej Kot, Program Director at the Warsaw Security Forum. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, lovely to be here with you.
So we are looking at the prisoner swap between Russia and U.S. as well as various of Western nations. Now, the Biden administration is touting this as a historical diplomatic victory. However, do you think that this would also open up some precedents for these type of hostage diplomacy and actually put U.S. citizens or other citizens of Western world in danger of possibly being kidnapped for more of these hostage exchanges?
Honestly speaking, I mean, for me personally, that is actually a limited success. For the reasons that you actually stated, because the hostage diplomacy that Putin is playing currently endangers, in a sense, all the Western journalists, all the Western civilians, citizens who are present in Russia currently, or who are actually who will in future, of course, be present there. Putin has been playing this hostage diplomacy for some time already. For him personally, I would say that he achieved a lot of things through this swap, through this exchange. Not only he was capable of bringing the top-level spies from the West back to Russia, also painting the image of his secret services as being very efficient, showing to the world that if you are playing in his team, that you are not left behind. But also, in a sense, by releasing the opposition figures to the West, he's also capable of showing to his own people that, look, if there were exchange for spies, then possibly they were also a part of some kind of spying activities in Russia. So in my opinion, for Putin himself, it is a perfect example of how he can actually play out the whole situation. And for the future, of course, that puts a lot of the Western journalists in danger for being held captive in exchange of any future hostages from the Western side.
Right, and we're not looking at an equivalent exchange here too. A lot of these Westerners in Russia were actually essentially kidnapped and imprisoned on false charges, and then in exchange, we somehow were able to give them top-level spies, military personnel. Do you think that in and of itself also presents an issue about these kind of, unequal trades?
Well, many people are actually showing some similarities between what we are experiencing right now and the Cold War toolbox, saying that this is like one of these huge prisoner swaps that were present also during the Cold War time, like, Glinica Bridge, etc., etc. But the fact is that as compared to the previous times, first of all, we are experiencing right now the exchange between the civilians, those who were held captive by the Kremlin, who are, of course, the Russian authorities. They're saying they were a part of the spying activities in Russia, but we do not have any clear evidence for that. We treat them as civilians. They're engaging in civilian duties such as being journalists, and they were indeed exchanged for people who were proven to be spies or actually even murderers in the Western world, being present in the Western world. So in a sense, this is like not an equal. It is not that easy of a comparison as to the Cold War times, where you indeed had spying activities from both sides, and those most famous exchanges were actually between the ones who were caught for actually, yes, even spying, even if they were, of course, part of the Western activities in the Soviet Union back then. But it was obvious that both sides were actually engaging in the spying activities. Right now, we have the exchange between civilians on one side and, of course, the ones who were proven to be part of the spying activities, or even, as I said, murderers on the Russian side.
Right, but in a sense, the Western world have our hands tied, right? Like, we can't just let our civilians be detained in Russia indefinitely. And unfortunately, we're looking at perhaps an unequal exchange, but it's also very necessary for these people to come back and reunite with their families. How's the West going forward going to have to balance not always playing into the Russians' hands while still being able to kind of take care of these humanitarian situations?
It is actually a question about our broader thinking, where we stand with Russia. Because if we are still thinking that Russia is conducting some kind of hybrid activities towards the collective West and then engaging in warfare against Ukraine, that this is not actually a very true image. Russia is currently conducting the warfare activities. They are not kinetic warfare activities, but there are already warfare activities towards the Western countries. Spying is one of these activities. Some kind of the arsons that were even happening in the Western world. Cognitive warfare, the whole toolbox of cognitive warfare. This is what Russia is already doing to our societies. So if we continue to think about this as something which is under the threshold of warfare, then yes, indeed, we have a problem of actually talking to our own societies, selling them the image of where we stand with Russia. The truth is that we are experiencing indeed a kind of a step forward to the Second Cold War. There is already something I would nickname another Iron Curtain that is currently starting somewhere in the forests of Finland and continuing with new bunkers being established in the Baltic states and then up to the front line in Ukraine. If we start thinking about our confrontation in Russia in these new terms, then our duty not only to speak to our society, trying to paint this image where we stand with Russia, but also our own toolbox in our activities towards Russia will completely change. That means that, for example, our funding of counterintelligence services, that would later, of course, resonate in capturing even more spies from the Russian side in our societies, will give us absolutely a different set of tools that we could actually engage with Russia. If those swaps, if those prisoners exchange will continue to happen. So first of all, Putin is already thinking in terms of warfare with us, and this exchanges of prisoners is only one of these elements in this toolbox. Whereas we are still back in thinking that we are conducting a set of diplomatic activities towards them.
Right, I think you brought up a very good point. When even we look at the media outlets from Russia, and their rhetoric is actually, like you mentioned, that of war. Call it propaganda, call it what you will. I think in the collective Russian consciousness, they are at war with the West. And like you mentioned, we see a lot of cross-border activities, be it espionage, be it cyber attack, or what happened in the Polish-Belarusian border. A lot of activities should be categorized, well, if not outright aggression, is on the brink of aggression. And if we don't change our thinking, we're essentially tying our own hands and let the aggression, let the provocation happen without really addressing it. However, when you talk about speaking to the society, I also observe a normalcy bias here where people are really kind of reluctant. I think there's a pushback to think of it as kind of the reality as you would describe it. Is there anything that we can do to kind of bring this message forward, to kind of showcase, to highlight the actual gravity at stake here?
I don't know if you remember the words of Prime Minister Tusk, who actually said that we are living in the pre-war times. This is quite a good description of where we stand right now, because many people think that if the war in Ukraine will end one day, that way or the other, whether that will be a truce or any kind of a victory from the Ukrainian or Russian side, that we will get back to business as usual as the pre-war times. The problem is here that we have already actually crossed the line. And the Western societies have to recognize that. I believe that still we are living in times where a lot of people are thinking that there is a comeback to where we stood with Russia, where we had stood with Russia before the war has started. The problem is that it is not there anymore. Mm-hmm. So once you cross this line, also in a way you create the narrative when you speak with the public, that automatically gives more obligations on you as a politician and on a society as a whole. First of all, on you as a politician, because it means that you have to invest more not only into the defense capabilities, but also in the capabilities that are such as intelligence, counterintelligence things. And on the society side, it means that you have to completely change your way of thinking about what the security is for you, what defense is for you, what kind of political choices you make, and what kind of narratives you buy or you do not buy, which means that you are completely changing your political attitudes. I guess we haven't crossed that line yet when we look at the society as a whole. Maybe in the Central Eastern Europe, many people are closer to this thinking that Russia is actually a very tangible threat, not only to Ukraine, but also to our own societies. But I can see that especially in the more west you go, the more there is actually a kind of hope that the war will end at one day and there will be come back to business as usual. Right. The thing is that there won't be. I mean, the best case scenario is actually another Cold War, because we are not in the Cold War time yet. We're very much in a hot war. But once we actually enter a new Cold War, yes, then we can establish some kind of communication channels with Russia, ways of how to actually create the toned times. But right now we are living in very much in a hot war time, and we have to change whole our thinking about whether we are ready to talk with Russia or we are not ready to talk with Russia. That means the duties on the side of the politicians and the duties on the side of the public.
Thank you so much for helping us unpack this really complicated situation, and thanks for being with us on Eastern Express. Really appreciate it. And now we move on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. More than 29 months after the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukrainian Air Force pilots have begun conducting aerial operations over their country on F-16s. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed the aided arrival of long-awaited American-made fighter jets.
Receiving the planes has been one of Ukraine's greatest strategic priorities, though it remains unclear how much direct impact they will have on the battlefield. Moreover, President Zelensky pointed out that Ukraine still does not have enough properly trained pilots to operate the F-16s, as well as enough of the jets themselves. According to Zelensky, it is vital that Kiev's allies find a way to expand their training programs and opportunities for both Ukrainian pilots and engineering teams. Over the past few months, Ukraine has relied heavily on its aging fleet of Soviet aircraft, vastly outnumbered and outgunned by Russia's more advanced and much larger fleet.
More than 50,000 Belarusian citizens were detained for political reasons since the breakout of the mass protests in the country in 2020. Now, the figure was reported and confirmed by representatives of the Belarusian Human Rights Center, Vyasna.
According to Vyasna's calculations, at least 5,472 Belarusians have been convicted in politically motivated criminal cases over the last 4 years. In August 2020, mass street demonstration kicked off in Belarus, protesting the rigged results of the presidential election, which secured the country's authoritarian leader, Alexander Lukashenko, his 6th consecutive term. Protesters demanded his resignation and the holding of fair elections, accusing the authorities of an unprecedented crackdown on opposition rallies. Human rights activists say at least 8 people have been killed during the crackdown. The Belarusian authorities have opened thousands of criminal proceedings against their democratic opponents, and hundreds of people, including opposition leaders, have received long prison sentences. As a consequence of the mass repressions, street protests virtually disappeared.
2 Russian Su-30 fighter jets were observed over the Baltic Sea, heading towards Latvia. 2 German and 2 Swedish military jets were scrambled to intercept their flight and secure their route.
According to the German Air Force's spokesperson, the Russian jets had their transponders turned off and were not responding to radio requests. No flight plan had been submitted in advance, which is customary for the operations in the Baltic Sea area. Although the Russian Su-30 pilots were described as uncooperative and unresponsive to signals, the German officials stressed that they did not behave in an aggressive manner. This incident follows similar events in the region. In March 2024, NATO fighters intercepted Russian military aircraft 5 times in a week, with the Russian side failing to provide flight plans then also. On July 25th, US and Canadian forces intercepted Russian and Chinese bombers near Alaska.
Authorities in Turkmenistan seek to implement a system enforcing control over the country's citizens' already limited access to the internet. In recent months, Turkmen nationals find a way to access the World Wide Web despite blocks and limits implemented by the local government.
The flow of information is heavily monitored in Turkmenistan. Individuals caught trying to circumvent government censorship to communicate with the outside world could face espionage charges. Currently, Turkmen security services are trying to block a method discovered by citizens to gain open access to the internet. Citizens of Turkmenistan living in the country's northern and eastern areas bordering Uzbekistan have begun buying Uzbek SIM cards on the growing black market. The crushing censorship of the Turkmen government has effectively cut the country off from the open web. Watchdog groups such as Freedom House have described Turkmenistan as one of the most repressive places on earth, a country where political rights and civil liberties are almost completely denied.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.